Welcome to the Your Innovation Coach webinar. Today's topic are the fundamentals of project portfolio management. First of all, I want to ask you a question, and that is, what strategies are you relying on to grow your top line revenue? I think for all of us, we rely on the core growth in our existing products. Though for most of us, that's not sufficient in order to continue to grow the top line. So we look for other strategies. For instance, maybe geographic expansion or acquisitions might play a part. But today, really, what we're going to focus on is looking at new product development, really as a strategic approach to grow your top line revenue. And to illustrate that point, this bar chart represents about a 10% year-on-year growth in total revenue over an 8-year period. And so if you think about this, really your products that are currently in production right now are generating that revenue. But you know intuitively over time that revenue is going to go down for a variety of reasons. It may be faster or slower depending on your industry and so forth. So that's why you've got other products in development. You're counting on those products to, once they're introduced to the market, to continue to allow the business to grow. But then there's a third category of all these product concepts that are percolating, so to speak, through the company that you have to make some decisions about and pick the right ones in order for you to continue to grow the business in the long term. So that's really what we're going to be focusing on today, is the process that we call portfolio management to help make those decisions on new products to allow you to continue to grow your top line revenue. Another way to look at that is to look at this chart and the fact that really what we're talking about is envisioning, planning, and carrying out a product line strategy. So in the middle here, you've got your existing product lines, and again, you've got products in production right now that are generating your revenue. You've got things that are in development that you're counting on to take the place of, to continue to grow that revenue. And then you've got all these products in concept, or PICs in this case, that are targets for new innovation. And typically you've got a lot more of these than you can ever hope to work on. So the real question is, which ones really are going to be most important for you, most compelling, and to make sure that you're working on the right projects to continue to grow your business given the limited resources that you've got. Of course, all this interacts with higher level strategic planning within the business in terms of target market segments, what targets represent the biggest opportunities for you, and of course that, once you've identified that, that's going to help drive some of these decisions, as well as the technology building blocks that you're going to need in order to support that development. So today we're really going to be focusing on this area of this curve, and particularly the decision-making processes that have to go in or have to happen within your business in order to make decisions out in this area. So first of all, definition of the project portfolio. In my mind, it really consists of 3 buckets. First is all the products and the services that you're currently working on, and you have resources assigned to those projects. The second bucket are all the products that you may have decided to work on, and you may have a fairly good definition of that product, but you don't have the resources. You're waiting on those resources in order to work on that project. And then the third category are all these potential new products that need to be considered within the business, but that you really have not made any decision on. So these are the 3 primary buckets that we're concerned about in project portfolio management. So today we're going to talk about a sample process, and here's an overview of that process. It really consists of a 4-step process, including an idea and management sub-process that all feeds into a project prioritization process, where you take those new ideas and line them up against the other buckets that we talked about, the existing projects as well as projects that are in the queue. And then out of that prioritization process, you then have to line those priorities up with the actual resources that you've got available. And it's only once you do that that you can actually then come up with a roadmap on where you're going to go with your new product development over the medium to the long term. And then you start over again. So this is a never-ending process. It's always going on in the background as new ideas come in. And of course, out of this process flows the projects that you actually assign resources to, and they enter into those projects enter into your phase development process that we covered in a previous webinar. However, really there's a lot of interaction between particularly the first couple phases of your phase gate process and the portfolio management process, because you may learn something, particularly in the prototype phase, that forces you to come back and reprioritize that project against maybe some other new opportunities. So there is interaction between your phase gate and your portfolio management process. And then of course eventually as you execute on the projects, they come out and go to market, and hopefully you've got the right products coming out in order to continue to grow that that top line. Today we're really going to focus on this part of this slide. The other key question is who the process owner is. In my mind, this portfolio management process needs to be owned by somebody. And in my opinion, it's usually a product manager that owns that process. It's not that that person is going to do all the activities in isolation from the other stakeholders, but somebody has to manage that process, make sure that the proper meetings are being held at the right time, and that you know, you're not subject to doing this process via hallway conversations. It really needs to be formalized in some way in order to make sure that you've got a good, robust decision-making process in order to make sure that the products coming out the other end here have the highest value. So you have a lot of leverage at this part of the process. Once you get into this part of the process, you don't have as much leverage in order to influence the quality of the products coming out at the other end in terms of being successful in the market. So let's focus first of all on this first part of the overall process, and that's the idea management sub-process. And really, if you think about it, there are a couple different types of ideas that we work on. One are product enhancements. These are for our existing products. It might be hardware enhancements, maybe new software features. Maybe if it's software related, it's, you know, you're dealing with software bugs. There might be other things related to maintenance projects or cost reduction projects. So all those kind of fall into product enhancements. And then there's a whole second category of brand new products. These are things that you don't have right now that may be either new to the market. In other words, they exist in the market, but not, you know, are new to you. Or they may be radical new to the world type of developments that don't exist at all anywhere. So that falls into kind of the second category. Of course, ideas come from all over and should come from all over. You probably get them from your customers, from your internal organization. Maybe you work with academia, trade shows and trade organizations, and even ideas from outside of your industry, particularly in the case of business models. Much of open innovation really is driven by this concept of looking outside of your industry for ideas. So the point is that ideas come from all over the place. There are some important voice of the customer methodologies, particularly some of the qualitative methods that we use in order to get good ideas particularly from our customer base. It's really outside of the scope of what we're talking about today, but the point is that ideas need to come from many, many sources, and you need to encourage that. You can use a very simple internal form for capturing ideas from your internal organization. This is an example of one that I've used in the past. It's easy enough to post up on a company intranet, and it allows your internal folks to give you some basic information, and then that will all flow into the product manager. Of course, there are a lot of good online tools today that provide different ways to do the same type of thing in a very convenient online type of format that you can leverage for collecting information from the internal organization. And the point is that all of this flows into the product manager, and they will use that all those ideas that come in based from the internal organization as well as externally to drive the input of what I would consider the precursor to a new product proposal. In a previous webinar in the phase gate discussion, we talked about this concept of a new product proposal or a marketing document. You can call it different names, but it's basically a definition of a new product. And that starts the development of a product in your phase gate process. But before you even get to this stage, you're probably going to develop some other maybe one-page type of definitions, descriptions of a new idea in order to run this portfolio process to try to get an apples-to-apples comparison between different ideas that are coming into the business to try to make some decisions about which ones of those you're actually going to push forward into your phase gate development process. So you can use a variety of different methods to do that. You could use the concept of a product innovation charter, so the product manager taking all that input can create a very simple one-page document that has some basic description of the objective of the development, maybe some guidelines in terms of, does it leverage our existing resources? Can we produce it with our current production facilities, et cetera, and then maybe a section on economic value in terms of how much revenue can we generate, what's the cost structure, what's the economic value of this idea. Another way is to use this concept of a product business case brief. This is a little more sophisticated than the product innovation charter. I kind of actually like it better just because of that. This comes out of this resource here. It's a little more sophisticated, a little more rigorous. You've got a section for describing the product. You've got an area for doing a kind of a qualitative strategic impact using a very simple scaling score method for coming up for a strategic score. Then you've got a section for looking at the market forecasting and then doing some risk assessment and coming up with a economic value that's risk adjustment or risk adjusted. So in this case, it's a risk adjusted net present value. So a nice way to look at economic value but adjust it for the risk factors. And then you can take it one step further and accommodate the actual resources that are required and come up with an overall project rating score. So this looks at not only economic value, but it looks at risks and it looks at the actual resources that are required and come up with a single number. Then now it provides a very nice financial way to compare different opportunities. So I really like this methodology, and I think it's a good way to put some structure around the concept of managing all these ideas that come into your business. And if you get to this point, a good way to make apples-to-apples comparison between new ideas. Of course, the idea here is to define this new idea as much as possible through these types of methodologies. But there is a caution, and that is you have to be somewhat careful of always listening to your customers. I think we as businesses tend to feel like we are customer-centric. We want to listen to our customers, but there is a danger. And to illustrate that, I'll use this slide. In the solid line is the performance of your product, particularly an existing technology, as a function of time. And we as businesses are very good at continuing to drive additional performance out of our current products over the longer term. But the problem is if you look at what the customer demands in terms of performance, there is a danger that you can outstrip the demand for performance, particularly at a specific price point. So customers will always tell you they want additional performance, but they may not tell you at what price they're willing to pay. And this can open you up to disruption in your business. For instance, somebody can actually start out at a lower performance level, but because they are improving that technology faster, so the slope here is higher compared to the slope on this line, at some point they may meet the requirements of the customer at a more advantageous price point. So again, you have to be careful of always listening to your customers because you can easily outstrip their demand for performance. So in summary, you've got this idea management system. You need to think about it in that way. You get ideas, that are submitted to the product manager in all forms, whether they're verbal or written, and then the product manager then needs to take all those ideas and maybe do a basic fitness test. And really, there are only 3 outcomes for an idea that comes into your business. Either you're going to quickly say no, that this just doesn't fit our strategic direction. Then it's important to provide feedback to, especially if it's an internal idea. So that might be one outcome of this fitness test. Another outcome is that, well, maybe we want to work on this or develop the idea, so let's record it in a database and maybe we'll recycle that idea later. Or the third option is you might determine, yes, quickly, we do want to go to the next step. We want to develop maybe the product innovation charter or the product business case brief that we discussed before, and then it really, from that stage, enters the next step of the portfolio process. So really you need to think about implementing this type of an idea management system, and again, I think it's best run by a product manager. Now, one thing I want to mention is a tool that you can use at this stage of the process, particularly in terms of trying to maintain some focus, and that's by using a concept called applied group concept mapping. Concept mapping has actually been around for a while. It's used particularly in the social sciences field, but applied group concept mapping is a tool that we can use in new product development. And here's some resources if you want to learn more about that concept. Applied group concept mapping is really a 4-step process. The first step is to develop some type of a focus question. So in other words, a focus question might be centered around what ideas do we have for a new product for this particular market segment. And then secondly, you might come up with a rating for that focus question. So not only do you want to get ideas for that particular market segment, but which ideas are, say, have the least risk, let's say. So you might also have some ratings associated with this focus questions. So that's the first step, is to come up with a focus question, maybe some rating questions, decide who the participants are, both internally and externally, and prepare for the process. The second step is a data generation, data collection phase. Here now you're going to throw this question out to the group. It's a software supported type of effort, so it allows you to bring in stakeholders from anywhere really, outside of the organization as well as internal folks, and generate those ideas. That all feeds back to the facilitator, who then takes all those ideas, sorts them. There might be duplicates that need to be eliminated. Ideas might be the same, just need to be rephrased and combined, and then all the rating questions brought in. So that's the second step, is data collection. And then that all feeds into a software model that basically provides a number of different analysis, including a mapping where you map similar types of ideas. So maybe this group of ideas are related to this group of ideas. Maybe these are product enhancements, whereas this group of ideas are really radically different and are a whole new set of ideas. So you can get a map related to how the different groupings of ideas relate to one another. There's some matching that can be done where particular folks in the organization might rank a certain idea higher than another group in the organization, and then additional type of analysis that helps you focus on where the the highest value ideas really lie within the data set. And then out of all this analysis, then you can really set some priorities. What are the higher priorities? What are the higher, the ones that are really common across all the different groups? So the idea is to come up with specific actions that you can then input into your portfolio management process. So another tool that can be used to help provide focus to the upfront planning. So anyway, you've got all the ideas that need to be generated, and then they have to flow now into the project prioritization process. So These ideas are going to be in the form of maybe these product innovation charters, maybe a product business case brief, maybe the output from this concept mapping. So those all now flow to the next step, which is where you have to line up all of those ideas against the other two buckets. The other two buckets being the projects that you've got currently that you're working on, as well as the group of projects that you might have decided to work on, but you're waiting on ideas. So the idea now is to line up those three buckets and prioritize them from 1 through X. So this is a raw prioritization from 1 to X. Now to continue on, before we really talk about the nuts and bolts of that process, it's important to understand that when you think about your portfolio of projects, they really boil down to three main types of projects that you're more than likely working on. One are product extensions. These are existing technologies that you're improving in some way. Kind of the second group are new products that are new to you but not necessarily new to the market. And then the third category are radical new to the world type of products. Now you can get more complicated. There are other dimensions that can make it more complicated, but these are basically the three types of products that you're more than likely working on. In most companies, maybe 80% of the new product development are product extensions, and there's nothing wrong with that. But you should have some resources going to both radical and new type of developments. So again, portfolio management is akin in new product development to a financial portfolio where you're trying to balance out risk. So one of the things as you go through this process is important to consider is, are you balanced for your particular situation in terms of the types of projects that you're working on? You don't want 100% product enhancements any more than you want 100% radical new to the world type of development. So that's something to think about as we go through this process. So with this type of process, you can use some really simple tools, particularly if you don't have any process in place to begin with. And so you can use a simple spreadsheet, and I'll illustrate that with this slide. So on this spreadsheet down the left-hand side are the projects that are ranked basically 1 through 20 in this case. So this is the current ranking of all the projects that you've got that you're considering in the portfolio. And then there's a column for a new rank. So presumably now we're going to come into a meeting and we're going to re-rank the project. So you've got a column for the new rank. This column is a scorecard, and there are different ways to generate scorecard numbers. This is another tool that you can use in order to help make decisions when you start having discussions about the rankings. And there are a couple different ways you can do this. One in particular is you can go back to that product business case brief, and I mentioned that out of that can come a single number that accommodates both the estimated revenue that's risk adjusted, and then accommodate it for the resources and come up with a single number that can be used for comparison purposes between different projects. So that's one method. I'll show you a second method here in just a minute. So that's what this column is for helping to have that discussion on the rankings. It's not that this will be the only data that you will use. There may be other reasons to do a project or rank it higher than another project, but it's just another tool that you can use. This column is a project status. So these projects are the active projects. You've got resources and you're actually working on that project. These projects here are indicated as active hold. That means that you have decided to work on that project, but you're waiting on the resources. And then all these projects are the new projects that have come onto the radar, so to speak, and you haven't made a decision whether you're going to work on them or not, or whether they're going to take the place of some of the other projects that you're working on. This column is for the project phase. Of course, these are active projects, so this just indicates what phase in development. And then this is the kind of project that project represents, whether it's a new to you or an extension, a product extension, or a radical new to the world, maybe an accessory or a maintenance project. Down here you see some projects that might be under research, which indicates that you know, you haven't decided, but you maybe are assigning some resources to work further on it right now. But anyway, this is the project type, and you can actually use this and generate some metrics. Again, as I mentioned before, it's kind of like a financial portfolio where you want to try to balance out risk. So you can look at the metrics associated with the types of projects. Out here is a different way that you can do a scorecard. So this is a different type of tool than this for generating a scorecard. This is a simpler qualitative technique where you just got multiple categories here, and you basically, with a large group of the project team, you do a qualitative assessment of each of these factors on a scale of 1 to 10. You average those all out and come up with an average score. So it's just a more qualitative method. This is a little more quantitative. So two different methodologies for generating this scorecard. Okay, so with that, now you've got a rating of all the projects, and on some regular basis, probably at least quarterly, you want to meet and review that list, and you're going to discuss all the projects and any new information that could affect that ranking, and then you're going to update that ranking. Now, you want to note that the ranking doesn't necessarily indicate the order at which the projects are going to be worked on. It's simply a priority from 1 to X, because now it's going to flow into the next step, which is really to line these priorities up with the resources. And a final comment here is to also remember that what's most important here in all of this is the process that you go through, the discussions that you have within the business. It's not the tools that you could use. I mean, you can support this process with a simple tool like an Excel spreadsheet, and I would advise to do that if you don't have any process in place. And if you want, then you can go further, and there are many, many online tools that are available, but those tend to be more expensive to roll out and implement. So again, if you don't have anything in place, I think the best thing to use is use simple tools like Excel, because again, what's most important is not the documents or the cost of the tool. It's really the process that you go through in order to make the decisions. Okay, so that was the first step was idea management. That flows into the project prioritization. Now we've got all the projects as well as new ideas rated from 1 to X. But now we have to look at the resources. Based on the prioritization, now we have to line that up with the resources before we can really come up with a plan. So that's the next priority, is to, based on those priorities, estimate the resources. Of course, for projects that are active, it's much easier to estimate future requirements on resources. But for future projects, particularly ones that are not well defined, the estimating resource requirements, you know, can become much more difficult. And the longer you go out in the time frame, the more assumptions that are required. So really, everyone within the business needs to understand the uncertainty of this process, particularly if you're trying to project, you know, multiple years out. So now, again, we'll use a very simple spreadsheet in order to manage this process. So the first step typically in a resource allocation process is, based on the priorities, more than likely the engineering manager is going to look at those various projects and try to rationalize, based on the resources that are available, what the project teams might look like. That's always going to be the first step, right? Putting together the project teams and understanding who needs to work on particular projects. And then based on that effort, now you can start looking at the resource allocation. This is a simple spreadsheet. Here we've got the existing projects that you're currently working on. So here is project 1, and these are the specific resources within the resource pool that are working on that project. The data in red here is actually what's happened up to this point in terms of how much time they've spent on the project. And then here is the project manager's estimates in order to get that project to market. So you've got existing projects that all lay into this spreadsheet, and then you've got, of course, sections where you can layer in new projects and start looking at the effect. So if you just consider the existing projects right now, this gives the engineering manager an idea, which is illustrated in yellow here, is where the resources are going to start to become available, that now you can line those up with these project teams for the new priorities and try to come up with a plan in terms of how you can put the plan together in order to accommodate the project priorities in concert with the resource allocation. So with that effort, now you can go to the final step, and I will make a comment that I think that this third process, the resource allocation sub-process that we just talked about, is by far the most difficult in my experience. These two steps are relative to this step much easier, and the reality is probably what's going to happen here is you do a first cut of this and you go back up here, so there's probably some back and forth that's going to happen between the prioritization and the resource allocation in order to try to rationalize the decision making that's going to happen within these two steps. But at some point, once you're concluded with this, you go to the final step, which is really the end game, and that is to come up with what I would call a consolidated project plan. So this is really a roadmap. You've got the different types of projects, and then on the top axis here is the years. And basically in black here are the projects that you're currently working on, and in red are all the new projects that are in varying stages of definition, but that you've made a determination out of this portfolio process that you want to work on, and now based on the resource allocation process, you've kind of got them lined out in terms of where they might flow in terms of the timing. And you'll note here that project number 19 might come to market before project number 14, even though project number 14 has a higher priority. And that's simply because of the resource allocation process. So this is really what you're after. And then of course from here, based on the financial performance of these different projects, you can now go back and start looking at that bar chart to try to rationalize whether this plan is going to accomplish what you want in terms of the long-term growth of the business. And then you basically start the process all over again. So this is a never-ending process that goes on within the business. Ideas, of course, are going to continue to come in. You're going to continue to reprioritize, and then out of this process will flow the projects that go into your phase development system. So in summary, portfolio management really helps answer several questions. First of all, how are you going to continue to grow that revenue, and what are the right projects that you should be working on in order to fit that strategy? So these are two key questions that portfolio management really is designed to answer, and to basically institutionalize decision making to make sure that you're using your scarce resources to work on the right projects. Secondly, you can use a very simple, easy to understand 4-step process and very simple tools like Excel to support it in order to manage this process. Because third, what's really more important is not the tools as much as the process that you go through in order to make the decisions. If you've got a robust decision-making process within your business, then that's the most important part, not how much you spend on the tools that you use to support the process. And finally, someone has to be responsible for the process. A product manager typically is going to drive this process. It's not that they're going to do every step, but they have to manage it and make sure that the decisions are getting made in a timely fashion. Okay, so I hope this was valuable to you today. Here's my contact information as always. I'm happy to entertain questions offline, and I look forward to your participation in the next webinar. Have a great day.